IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is Wednesday, September 27th. Wednesday means midweek rundown time. September 27th means we're 3 days away from Notre Dame getting back on that horse and taking on the Duke Blue Devils, the undefeated 4-0, 17th ranked Duke Blue Devils, who have yet to play a game this season that was closer than 21 points, and that includes a 28-7 win over Clemson. We introed Duke last night, talked a lot about that program. Absolutely love the job that Mike Elko's doing. I know there was a time where like a lot of Notre Dame fans were like, I'd love it if Clark Lee was the next head coach and all that, but this is the guy that I was very curious to see how he would do as a head coach, because I loved him as a defensive coordinator and recruiter. Great deal of respect for him as a human being. And I'll say this, actually, I'll give Brian Kelly credit for this. He made 3 strong hires in a row at defensive coordinator of not just good coaches, but good people. Mike Elko being one, obviously Clark Lee being one, and obviously Marcus Freeman being one. So I will give him credit there. But I really like what Mike Elko does schematically. I love his aggressiveness. And he took on a challenge at Duke, inherited a bad 3-9 football team, and he has turned them around in a hurry. The Blue Devils have gone 13-4 in his now. He is now in what, about to be, he's a third of the way through his second season in Durham at a place that's not exactly, a place that has a long history of success. The Blue Devils won, if you actually go look at it, in the 3 years before Mike Elko was hired, Duke won 10 games and lost 25. So they went 10-25, and he is 13-4. So he's doing an excellent job there. Going to have some fun talking about the matchups that matter this weekend, because this is a game that if Notre Dame is going to win, they're going to have to play well. It's a lot like NC State. I've actually been far more impressed with Duke so far this season than I have been with NC State, because Duke has a better offense. They're both very good defensive football teams. Duke has been a better defense in a lot of ways statistically. I think part of that, it comes down to the competition that they've played. But Duke has also got a very good defense, coached very well, but their offense is more dangerous. They have a very similar quarterback to what NC State has style of play-wise, but Riley Leonard's a more talented kid, and he's got better weapons around him, and he definitely has a better offensive line. So this is going to be a big, big test for Notre Dame. This is a very confident Duke team. And, the thing I like about this Duke team, too, is they don't even play. They haven't, like, when you go watch their UConn game, I don't think Duke necessarily played lights out in that game, to be completely honest with you. I don't think that was like, oh, my gosh, that Duke team was hitting on all cylinders, and they won 41-7. I mean, they only had 322 yards of offense. Their defense played pretty well. Only 5.3 yards per play. It was the lowest output of the season, against only rushed for 74 yards. It was not exactly a great performance by Duke, but they did what they needed to do and won going away in the second half. So I was very impressed with what Duke did this weekend. Now Notre Dame's going to have to come off and shake off the loss to Ohio State and get back on track and realize that, hey, look, our goals are still in front of us. The number one being playing the Notre Dame to the Notre Dame standard, the golden standard, which is always the weekly goal for this football team. But there's a lot going on that if your ultimate goal is still to be a playoff team with a chance to play for national championship, that's still in front of you. You look at where Notre Dame is now; they're 11th in the AP poll. If you look at where they would be in the in the college football playoff rankings, who knows? But they've got at least one. They've got one team that's ranked ahead of them still left on their schedule. There's a lot of matchups between the teams ahead of them where they got to play each other. So still a lot of football left, but if Notre Dame is going to be that kind of team, obviously this is a big hurdle they got to get past. And so you can't be looking forward to what your playoff resume is going to look like, because you need to worry about that one spot on your resume that is the Duke Blue Devils. And I also think we're going to learn a lot about this Notre Dame football team with how they bounce back this week, and not just bounce back from what is the mindset and the psyche, but what adjustments do they make, and what improvements do they make, and are they able to execute at a higher level against what is a really good Duke football team. So that's going to be a lot of what we're going to talk about today. The specific aspects of this matchup that we're going to discuss today, first and foremost, we're going to talk about the matchups. We're going to kind of break down the statistical analysis, and I'm going to key in on one specific matchup on each side of the ball that is going to go a long way towards determining how this football game goes. Then I'm going to break down 3 people. Notice I didn't say players. three people on each side of the ball, offense and defense for Notre Dame, that need to step up this weekend. And this isn't a step up as in necessarily they haven't played well. It's just more of a unique to Duke. If they're going to play their game against Duke, these guys have to step up. Some of them haven't been playing well. I'll discuss it. Others, it's not necessarily the case. It's just you're going to be counted on this weekend if Notre Dame is going to get this thing turned around. And then at the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about just quarterback recruiting and just where things stand and just my excitement level about the present and the future of the Notre Dame quarterback position. And we will do a little mini mailbag. Obviously, super chats will be responded to first because they're the easiest to see. It's going to be a lot harder for me to go through and star all the questions, but I will do some. And then at the beginning, I did have a question for you all before we get started, and I'll kind of look through the responses after the show, but I'm very curious what your guys' thoughts are. I've been thinking about mixing things up a little bit for the show, and one of the things I've thought about doing is doing a Friday show where we sort of preview the upcoming weekend. We talk about whatever recruiting situations are going on, what's the latest news, previewing the big weekend, and then having Ryan record sort of like an extra show on Monday or Tuesday that we just kind of post that wraps up the weekend, and then making the mailbag on Friday the Monday mailbag. And the reason that I've been thinking about this is because the way that our shows go, because our shows on Saturday and Sunday are later, we don't really do mailbags on post-game show. We don't really do mailbag for the upon further review unless it's a super chat, which requires you all to have to pay. So you guys don't ever really get a chance to have sort of a post-game mailbag that where you guys get to really ask questions and talk about things. And if we were to do a Monday show where it was just the mailbag on Monday, then that would allow us to kind of talk about the game that was played, kind of preview the upcoming game, and also to be able to talk about some recruiting questions as well. So just a thought, and I want to know what you guys would all think about that. You guys and gals would think about all that. Just so when I say guys, it's more referring to just the general, people. It's just kind of how I talk, how I was raised growing up. So I just wanted to get that out there. So I'd love to hear your comments and thoughts. I would also, if you're on the message board and you want to continue this conversation further on the message board, I would love to get your thoughts on that about maybe possibly mixing up the mailbag in season. This was being an in season thing. We would go back to Friday once the season is over with. So just wanted to throw that out there to you guys and see what you thought. So let's get into this Notre Dame and Duke matchup. This is a really fascinating game. And when I look at this game, look, we had a question yesterday, a super chat yesterday that was really interesting where, someone said his brother who knows football just thinks this is not a big idea kind of game. And I'm like, I get that. I understand it because Duke's history, but I'm telling you all, the more I watch this film and the more I'm just like, man, this is a good football team. Because I'll be honest, like I watched the Clemson game and I liked what Duke showed. And we've been praising Duke all off season. I love the job Mike Elko's doing. And we've said that they've got better talent than people give them credit for. And I watched the Clemson game, and that was a game that, Duke did a lot of good things. And, Duke was making plays when they need to make plays, making stops when they need to make stops. But Clemson shot themselves in the foot a lot that game as well. Some of it was forced. Some of it was not forced. And you say, that game wasn't really a 21-point game. That was a game where Clemson in the fourth quarters got the ball inside the 5 about to take a lead. They didn't make the plays they needed to. Duke did. And of course, the game ended the way that it did. And I hadn't watched until started previewing this game. I hadn't really watched more than just some highlights of the 3 games they've played. And you look at it, and it's like it's Lafayette, it's Northwestern stinks, it's UConn stinks. They're 0-4. I think Lafayette's the best team that they've played so far record-wise at the FCS level. But you kind of look at it and say, how good are they really? And are they the team that I thought they were coming into the season? And you break down the film and you're like, yeah, they're every bit as good. But it actually, in my opinion, they're better. And here's why they're better. They're better in the trenches than I thought they were going to be. They had a couple good offensive linemen, but I didn't think their offensive line was going to be as good as it is. It's such a veteran offensive line. It reminds me, it's not quite as talented or as big, but it reminds me a lot of the Michigan line from 2 years ago, which didn't have really any high draft picks in it. Michigan doesn't have any first round draft picks on their line the previous 2 years. It was just a veteran, tough group that played incredibly well together. And this line's not that good from the standpoint of it's as good as what Michigan's was a couple years ago, but it's very good. They play very well together. And you look at the numbers and the stats, and you'll see what I'm talking about when I bring up these numbers here in a minute. But this is a team that's better in that area. Their secondary is better than I thought it was going to be. The transfers have really helped. Al Blades has helped. Myra Jones has helped them a lot in the secondary as a transfer in. Their Miles Jones, excuse me, has helped them as a transfer coming in. Big, tall, rangy kid that Mike Elko recruited, I believe, recruited to Texas A&M, and he transferred here. Got a lot of numbers they can throw out, a lot of athleticism. They're aggressive. They're well coached. So they're an even better team than I thought that they would be coming into the season. And they were one of my 5 toughest opponents coming into the season. And they were our trap game coming into the season. And so you see that and you're like, okay, they're going to need to bring it today because this one could get a little bit challenging for Notre Dame. And so they're gonna have to be on top of their game. And so what does that mean? Football is a game of matchups. Y'all know that I believe that, have always believed that. And matchups means a couple things. Number one is matchups means just big picture. How does your team schematically, philosophically, strengths for weaknesses, your personnel versus their personnel, how does it match up against other teams on your schedule? I mean, you look at different times with some of the better teams. What is it about Syracuse that they just always seem to give Clemson a game? And I'm talking about when Clemson was good. You know, they almost beat Clemson in 2018. They beat Clemson in 2017 when Syracuse was 4-8. So it wasn't even like Syracuse was a good football team, and they were still able to beat Clemson that season. They played Clemson tough, I believe, in was it 2020 or 2021? They played Clemson tough again. And there was one year that Clemson blew them out. But if you go back and watch the game, it was like third quarter, Syracuse has got the ball. I think it was like 26-21, 27-21. Syracuse has got the ball with a chance to take a lead. And then Clemson kind of poured it on late. But what is it about that matchup that this team just tends to play way better against this team than other teams do? If you guys remember back in the early 2000s and 2010s, when Ole Miss, of all the teams in the SEC, when the SEC was strong, of all the teams that beat Alabama twice in a row, it was Ole Miss that did that. Why? What is it about that matchup? And so this game is a matchup that, to me, Duke matches up a lot better against Notre Dame than some other teams in the schedule that might be even better than Duke or better teams than Duke because of the way that they play, the way that they're constructed, the way that they're built. And it's going to require Notre Dame to play well to win this game. And so you look at like the NC State game, for example. NC State, y'all know I love Tony Gibson as a D coordinator. Think that defense is really good, but you knew the way that they played that there was a chance that Notre Dame was going to be able to rip off some big plays if they just stuck with it, right? You knew that you could get those plays because they would eventually kind of blitz themselves into trouble. And that's what happened in that game. Duke's not like that. Duke is a much more disciplined defense. Now they've got some post-snap aggressiveness, but it's not a heavy pressure team. They're not a heavy blitz team. And so it's going to require a greater level of execution, focus, and a strong game plan to be able to go out there and have success. And then on the other side of the ball, for a team that likes to blitz a lot, for a team that has not been a great tackling team all year, you're now playing a quarterback that can hurt you more than any other quarterback on your schedule outside of maybe Caleb Williams, just for this particular type of matchup. Not to say that Riley Leonard is better than Caleb Williams or is good. I'm talking about like how his legs can hurt you. Caleb Williams is athletic, but he likes to do work in the pocket. Riley Leonard has no problem taking off and running and being that team's top runner. He has no problem doing that. And you know, they do a lot of design runs for him where they can get extra blockers at the point of attack because they can use their quarterback as a runner. And he had 98 yards against Clemson. He has 97 yards against Northwestern. So in their 2 games against Power 5 teams, he's rushed for almost 100 yards both times, and he's only had 21 carries in those 2 games. So Duke presents a very unique challenge for Notre Dame based on how they're constructed. And that's what makes this matchup even more intriguing and why I say that this Notre Dame team is going to have to really bounce back in a hurry if they're going to get back on track in the win-loss column. So let's look at the matchups. Let's dive into these specifically and get into these matchups. So what I'm going to do here, these are the stats and stuff that I've brought up in the past. You guys know what these are. We'll dive into these things specifically. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the Notre Dame offense against the Duke defense. Break down two of the three areas that we talk about. You know, there's the scoring aspect, which includes scoring, total defense, third down, red zone, big plays, turnovers, and all that. And just kind of briefly talk about those matchups. And then I'll take one of the two run or pass option matchups and then just briefly talk about that. And then zero in on the one key matchup that I think is going to have the biggest impact on the outcome of the game and dive into that. And then I'll get into the defense and we'll do the same thing. So let's first start off with a look at the scoring offense and the scoring defense. Now, Duke so far this season obviously has been an outstanding defense as far as keeping points off the board. Only one of their opponents has scored double digits this year, and that was Northwestern. And I'm going to give you the exact number, but I believe that second touchdown that got them in double digits was scored with less than 2 minutes to go. And so I'm going to look at the box score real quick, and that touchdown was scored with 1:27 to go. So Duke scored that. So so for this season, there has only been a minute and 27 of game time where a Duke opponent has played in a game where they've had double digits in points. That includes holding Clemson to 7, holding Louisiana Lafayette. No, that's not who it was. It was Lafayette, the Patriot League team in Pennsylvania. Held them to 7 points, and then they held UConn to 7 points. And so they've done a great job of keeping points down. And it's not like they're giving up a lot of yards and then teams are just not scoring. That happened in the Clemson game, as I mentioned. Clemson had 422 yards, 5.1 yards per play. But Lafayette only had 213 yards. Northwestern only had 267 yards, and 70 of that, I think about 65 to 70 of that came on that last scoring drive when it was basically against Duke's backups. And then UConn only had 203 yards of total offense and 3.1 yards per play against Duke. So very stingy defense so far. Rank 16th in the country in total defense, 5th in yards per play, that's the number I care more about. Their red zone defense has been outstanding. It's a big part of the reason that their point total is so low. Teams have only scored on 5 of their 10 red zone trips. Now, all 5 of those trips have been touchdowns, which I thought was interesting. Duke has also only allowed 2 plays of 30 yards or more the entire season, which leads the nation. And they've been a pretty good turnover team. They forced 2 turnovers per game. If you want to look at it from a Notre Dame standpoint, their Notre Dame defense, they average 1 turnover per game. And that's going to be part of an article I'm going to be working on when the show is over about the lack of disruption from the Notre Dame defense. On the flip side, you look at the Notre Dame offense. Their scoring offense is 18th. If you look at the competition they've played 2 pretty good defenses so far. The Ohio State defense has been outstanding so far this season. The NC State defense has also been pretty good this season. Obviously they gave up, 21 points to Virginia, who's honestly not very good. But it's not like they just got ran up and down by the Virginia the whole game. So it's their defense is very good. They gave up 273 to UConn. They a lot of that was on one play. They gave 384 to Virginia and a couple chunk plays in that game as well. Held VMI to 191. Notre Dame went for 456, 7.5 per play. The next worst performance by NC State was 5.4 against Virginia. So they played that defense, which was pretty good. And then, of course, they played Ohio State, who currently ranks 2nd in college football in scoring defense at 8.5 per game. And Notre Dame only scored 14 points. So the defense that most resembles the Duke Blue Devils statistically is Ohio State. And Notre Dame had by far their worst offensive output of the season. Held under 400 yards, held only 14 points. All of it came in the second half and wasn't able to move the ball enough to win the football game. So it's going to be a chance for the Notre Dame offense to show something. Dive into that a little bit more here as we get into the more specific matchup. Notre Dame yards per game, they're about similar. Yards per play, they're very similar. Red zone offense, they're both, it kind of flips where Notre Dame only ranks 40th in red zone offense and Duke ranks 40th in touchdown percentage. Then Notre Dame ranks 6th in touchdown rate. Duke ranks 2nd overall. But what this basically means is when Notre Dame gets into the red zone, they are scoring touchdowns. And if I'm remembering correctly, I believe Notre Dame had a game end in the red zone I believe, I can't remember if it was Central Michigan or Tennessee State. I'll have to go back and look. But Notre Dame had a game end in the red zone. Actually, I have it right up in front of me. Notre Dame's last possession of a game ended in the end in the red zone. So just give me a second. I'm going to find that out. And was an NC State? I thought maybe I'm incorrect on this one. Perhaps. Let me go to Central Michigan. And was it Central Michigan? No. So it looks like I might be incorrect on that. But I thought Notre Dame had a game end in the red zone. But they did not, it looks like, so I'll have to go do a further dive. But I remember there being something about that statistic where it was a little bit better than you say. But still, Notre Dame ranks 6th in college football in red zone touchdown percentage. They have only turned the ball over twice this season, so they're playing a good team forces turnovers. They have not turned it over. They're playing one of the best defenses in the country in limiting big plays, and Notre Dame is one of the best big play teams in the country. Of course, Ohio State was also a very good defense when it comes to limiting big plays, and Ohio State ranks 6th in plays of 30 yards. Excuse me, Ohio State ranks 2nd in plays of 30 yards or more, and Notre Dame didn't have any plays of 30 yards or more against Duke. Or did they have one? No, they didn't have any. Their longest gain was, like, I think, 29 yards in that game. So very interesting matchup. The one area where Notre Dame has a big advantage in this area. Now, neither team has a huge advantage over the other. Duke has a better scoring defense, but it's ranks 4th to 18th. They have an advantage in total defense, but it's 16th to 20th. Yards per play, their advantage is 5th to 8th. Notre Dame has a better red zone touchdown defense, but Duke has the better red zone overall red zone defense. They're both highly ranked in big plays, 1st and 7th, turnovers 4th and 21st. Notre Dame has the advantage. The one big gap in this breakdown is the third down defense and third down offense matchup. Notre Dame ranks 10th in college football in third down offense. That's actually something they did well against Ohio State in the second half. Notre Dame's third down success in the second half. They started the game off well. They've converted their first 2 third downs and then missed their next 3 or 4. And then in the second half on those 2 touchdown drives did very well converting third downs. But then, of course, they didn't get the one at the end. But Notre Dame, even against Duke or against Ohio State, who has an okay third down defense, not great, but it's good. Notre Dame was able to go 5 of 10 for 50% in that game. And it was actually their third best performance of the season. It was better than they did against Central Michigan and better than what they did against NC State. So that was a positive sign you're going to need to build on. Duke has been a pretty good keeping points off the board defense. They're very good in the red zone, but they have allowed teams to move the football consistently on third down. And that's something that if Notre Dame could take advantage of that, it could be a very big key to this game. And the reason it matters is because in these games, you want to be in a situation where if you're Notre Dame and you have the athletes you have, the more times you can convert third downs and keep the sticks moving and keep the series going, the better chance that you can pop off that big play. It's not just about moving the chains to methodically go down the field and score. Nobody's good enough to against a good team to just have 6, 7 possessions that are 8, 9, 10, 11 plays that you're going to score. It rarely happens. And so you can have a few of those, but then you need to have some drives that are built around big plays. But if you're good on third down, which means early down success as well, then you're going to have a chance to go out there and have an opportunity to rip off those big plays. And that's something Notre Dame's going to need to do on Saturday. Let's look at the matchup of the Notre Dame run game against the Duke rush defense. This is an intriguing matchup. We're going to find out just how good this Duke run defense is this weekend. I think Notre Dame absolutely, in my opinion, showed that they are a very good rushing offense this season when they did what they did against Ohio State. If you guys remember, Ohio State's rush defense through the first couple games of the season was really, really, really good. If you look at the Buckeyes rush defense, they had held Indiana to 71 yards, Youngstown State, they held to 99 yards, Western Kentucky, they held to 80 yards. The highest yards per carry they had was 30. And then Notre Dame went out and ran for 176 yards and 39 attempts. Obviously, that includes for Notre Dame, some carries by the quarterback and some They, took a knee and some of those type of different aspects of the matchup. But Notre Dame was able to go out there and have success moving the football on Ohio State, especially in the second half. Notre Dame ran for 126 yards in the second half against Duke or against Ohio State, which is good. And that just shows you stay on it, even against a good defense like Ohio State. If you stick with it, you're going to be able to wear a team down. They did that to NC State as well. And NC State, as we've talked about before, also has a pretty good rush defense this season. And Notre Dame was able to get the ball rolling against them. 2 games since they played Notre Dame, NC State held VMI to 15 rushing yards. They held to Virginia 113, only 2.8 per carry. So their rush defense has been pretty good, and Notre Dame's been able to get going. Duke, on the other hand, we're going to find out how good their run defense is this weekend, because if you look at their overall numbers, they're solid. They rank 70th in the country in yards per game. It's only 133. 133 is not a terrible number. It just ranks lower now because there's teams that have, played really bad opponents or, had a really low game that keeps them down. They're 65th in yards per attempt, 51st in tackles for loss. Last 3 games, they've done a lot better. They held Lafayette to 126. They held Northwestern to 104. They held UConn to 89. UConn's a team that likes to run the football, so their numbers look good. It's just they don't rank as well because they gave up 213 to Clemson. And so what we're going to find out this weekend is, does Duke have a really good rush defense, but just happen to give up, some good yardage to Clemson in the opener, or are they a solid run defense that can be vulnerable to the better rushing teams on the schedule? That's what we're going to find out. Because if you look at the Clemson game, and it wasn't a bunch of quarterback runs, they went for 213. Kate Klubnik had 34 yards, but their top 2 running backs, Will Shipley and Phil Maffa, combined for 179 yards on 28 carries. They averaged over 6 yards a carry. And Maffa had a 49-yard run, and so that helped his 5.9 per carry. Shipley's longest run was only 18 yards, and he still averaged 6.7 per carry. So he was gashing Duke. If you watch that game, he was gashing Duke. They just couldn't put the ball in the end zone. That was really the big key to that game. Notre Dame's rush offense has been pretty good this season. Obviously, we've talked about that. They've played a couple really good run defenses so far this season and have still been able to get the ball rolling and still been able to run the football this season. Notre Dame's lowest yardage output of the season was 170 against NC State. That was a game where Notre Dame had a lot of negatives from a sack standpoint. They gave up, I believe Sam Hartman was sacked 4 times in that game for minus 43 yards. I still don't understand why college football counts sacks as rushing yards. I don't get it. It should be like the NFL where your team passing stats are impacted by sacks. I don't really understand that, but that's just the way that it is. So Notre Dame actually had, if you go back and look at it, they had 43 yards in sacks, which meant the Notre Dame run game actually produced over 200 yards when you include the quarterback draw by Sam Hartman that went for a first down as well on a 3rd and 10. So, the Ohio State game is technically their lowest rushing output of the season from a rushing yard standpoint, and that was a game in which Notre Dame still went out and ran the ball for over 176 yards. Ohio State didn't have any sacks against Notre Dame in that game. They had some decent pressures, but no sacks, so all those rushing yards were legit. They only had 1 carry. The first carry of the game went for minus 1 yards. After that, Notre Dame had 0 negative carries the rest of the game. They had some zeros and some 1s and 2s, but no negatives. And you can see that there. Notre Dame ranks 10th in the country in tackles for loss allowed. They rank 16th in the country in carries of 30 yards or more, with 4 on the season. Had another one called back. They rank 16th in yards per attempt. So Notre Dame's run game is not rushing for ranking where it does, because they had that one big game. They actually haven't had that one big game. Their highest output so far is 236 yards. If you go back and look at last year, by the 5th game of the year, Notre Dame had already had a 287-yard performance against North Carolina. They had a 263-yard performance against Clemson, 246 against Syracuse, 281 against Boston College, 265 against South Carolina. So Notre Dame has not had that one giant, like, wow, what a great game like they had in even 2017 might be a better example, where, 2017 Notre Dame had 7 games where they rushed for at least 318 yards with a low of 318 in that stretch, and then a high of 515. Also went for 422 against Temple that year, went for 377 over an 11-win USC team. went for 318 against NC State, who had their entire starting defensive line got drafted and their middle linebacker. Notre Dame hasn't had that. What Notre Dame has been is just a consistently really good running team. Do we see that breakout game come this weekend? Is it going to come somewhere down the road? I don't know the answer to that, but watching that Ohio State game, there just was about 3 or 4 carries, and this was actually true for both offenses, I felt. And it won't shock me if Ohio State next week, when they get back out on the field, it won't shock me if they start having some big rushing attacks over the next couple games, because I thought Notre Dame did a very good job against the Ohio State rush defense. Obviously, they had the 61-yard gain, which is something Ohio State needed. They haven't really been able to kind of break off that kind of run. They only went for 126 yards, but there was about 4 or 5 times where you just felt like, boy, they were one guy away from maybe ripping that off. And I felt the same way about Notre Dame against Ohio State. And we've seen Notre Dame do that against other teams. Is this the week they have that big performance? I do not know, but it's going to come sooner rather than later. But what I love about what Notre Dame has done so far in the run game is the consistency. And they're going to need that to get going against Duke. Now let's get into the matchup that is going to have the biggest output on this game, or the biggest impact on this game, excuse me. That is the Notre Dame pass offense against the Duke pass defense. And Notre Dame's rankings are outstanding. Obviously, they ranked 34th in the country in yards per game. That's a little misleading because they've had a couple games where they didn't throw a whole lot in the second half. They rank 7th. They're in the top 10 nationally in yards per attempt, total touchdowns, fewest interceptions, pass efficiency, and plays that rank in the top the pass plays have gone for at least 30 yards. They also rank 18th in fewest sacks allowed. They're 16th in the country in yards per completion. So far this season, statistically, the pass game has been outstanding. Here's the problem. When you look at what Notre Dame did against the best team that they played so far, the best pass defense they've played so far, their pass offense had by far its worst game of the year. And so you're playing a defense this week in North Carolina, or excuse me, in Duke, that has one of the best pass defenses in college football. And it's for several reasons. Number one, as I said before, they're coached extremely well. Mike Elko on down. Tyler Santucci is one of his co-coordinators. He was a GA, I believe a GA or an analyst at Notre Dame the year that Mike Elko's here. So he's a guy that knows the Notre Dame program. But they've been very good so far. I mean, you look at their numbers. They rank in the top 5 in yards allowed, fewest yards allowed per game. They rank number 1 in the country in yards allowed per attempt, number 2 in yards allowed per completion. They're number 4 in pass efficiency defense, and they have yet to allow a single play of 30 yards or more on the season. And, even the statistics where they're not super high interceptions, they've had 4 in 4 games. So that's 1 per game. And they do rank 76 in sacks. So they're not a team that gets a lot of sack pressure, but they get a decent amount of pressure that can be disruptive. And that's why Duke ranks where they rank when it comes to their pass defense. Now, another area that Duke ranks pretty well, but not quite as elite, but still very well in their pass defense that's not listed here, is Duke ranks 23rd in the country in completion percentage allowed. They're at 53%. Or excuse me, 55% is where they are. So they're at 55% on the season. So Duke's got a very stingy pass defense. They're not super long on the defensive side of the ball. Here's their starting lineup. They're a true 4-2-5. Their nickel's 5'10", 280. Their safeties are 5'8", 177, 6'5", 197. They have another safety that plays a ton who's 6'1", 196. Chandler Rivers at corners, 5'10", 178. The other corner, Al Blades, is 6'1", 191. He's got good size. And then they bring Miles Jones, who also plays a lot at corner. He'll play a little bit all over. He's 6'4", 194. It's the only guy that has like really great size on the outside. But they're physical and they're really well coached. And they just don't beat themselves. They really don't. And here's a statistic that's on there that shows how good they are, in my opinion. That's not listed, but I did want to kind of bring up real quick. Is passes defensed. So if you look at Duke this season, they rank 13th in the country in passes defensed. I talked about this a little bit last night. 3 of the teams ahead of them have played 5 games, where Duke has only played 4. If you look at where they rank in pass breakups on the season, Duke is 10th. And 4 of the teams that rank ahead of them have played 5 games, and then one of the teams tied with them has played 5 games. So, yes, they don't create a lot of sacks, but they do create a lot of havoc with the pass game. A lot of pass breakups, a lot of getting the quarterback out of his comfort zone, so to speak. And they're very, very good at that. If you look on the season, Duke opponents have attempted 129 attempts on the season. So 129 pass attempts. And Duke has broken up a pass on 24 of those. So it's basically like almost one every 6, actually little better than that. One out of on that. Let me just type this. Let me just add this in there real quick. Let me just do a little quick calculator. So one of every just over 5 pass attempts are broken up or intercepted, and they've done a very, very good job in that. So this is a very disruptive pass defense, and I think that's good for us as Notre Dame fans and good for Notre Dame, and I'll explain why. I don't know exactly who this pass offense is yet. It's certainly better than it was last year. It certainly has better weapons than it had most of last year. You certainly have a better quarterback than you had last year. The pass protection has been more consistent than it was last year. But what we don't know is it a good pass game, or can it be a pass game good enough for this team to be a championship football team? Against Ohio State, it was not good enough. And there were some good numbers. They completed 68% of their passes, but they only averaged 7.0 yards per attempt. So, coming into the game, been great. 10.1 against Navy, 11.2 against Tennessee State, 11.9 against NC State, 12.2 against Central Michigan. They had thrown 15 touchdowns. Their lowest quarterback rating up to that point was 198.67, which is exceptional. As you can see on the season, Notre Dame still ranks very high in pass efficiency. They're still 5th. But there's that one game that stands out, and that's against Ohio State. They only passed for 175 yards. They only went for 175 or 7.0 yards per attempt, and their quarterback rating was only 140. And if you look at what that would mean, 140, it's just one game, right? But if you look at kind of where that is from a context standpoint, that 140 ranking would rank them 65th in the country right now in pass offense. They don't play in a team like Ohio State every week. And although the Duke secondary is not as good as Ohio State, it's not far behind, in my opinion. The difference is they're not as good up front on paper and on film. Doesn't mean they won't play better, but they are a very good pass defense. And so what we're going to learn this week is, number one, is Notre Dame willing and able to do more in a pass game with the pass game against a better opponent? Are they just going to be a ground and pound team that tries to create some big play opportunities? That's fine. I don't know that that's going to work a ton against Duke, because it says right there on the breakdown, Duke is yet to allow a completion of 30 yards or more on the season. Are they going to look at the Ohio State game and say, hey, look, we've got to get better in some very fundamental areas? So if you're Coach Stuckey, do you look at that and say, man, my guys didn't play well? Or do you say, you know what, this is the second game in a row and against a pretty good pass offense or pass defense where my guys didn't do a very good job getting off the line? I got to fix that. That's on me. I got to adjust that. Do you do things where you say, okay, you're now 5 games in. Are you going to find ways to use certain players better, differently, more to improve your pass game? Because right now, we say this all the time, right? You don't get evaluated and judged on what you do against NC State and Central Michigan and Tennessee State and Navy. You get judged on what you do against Ohio State. And what you did against Ohio State was your pass game wasn't nearly good enough to win the football game. It only led you to 14 points. Yeah, you had a couple drives late, where you were able to get going. But Ohio State, for the most part, shut your pass game down. And this Duke team is going to present a very similar challenge. Very disruptive secondary, a lot of coverage mix-ups. They're going to come up and show certain things and roll to other things and ask a lot of their safeties. And when you look at Sam Hartman, Duke beat Wake Forest last year, which obviously is, good for Duke. But Sam Hartman was not the reason they lost the game last year. I mean, Sam Hartman had a very productive game against Duke last year. He passed for 347 yards, 8.3 per attempt, and had 3 touchdowns and a decent passer rating of 150.12. 61.9% was solid. Did throw a pick in that game and rushed for I think 20 some yards in the game as well. So Sam Hartman's knows what this defense is like structurally, but this is a much better version of that defense. This defense from a passing standpoint is much better. They, as I said, they got some grad transfers in that are good football players. They're a team that's a lot more disruptive this year in their pass game than they were last year. If you look at last season, through the first 4 games of the year, they had given up 435 yards passing to Northwestern. They had given up 324 to Kansas. They gave up 380 to North Carolina, 279 to Miami, 330 to BC, 347 to Wake Forest. They were not a very good passing team last year. They even gave a defense. They were not a very good pass defense last year. They're a lot better this year, a lot better this year. And year 2 in the system, plus some new players that they brought in, has made them a lot better. So Notre Dame is going to have to work for yards this week. I want to see changes to what they're doing schematically, not changes. I want to see some adjustments to what they're doing schematically and technically to improve who they want to be as a football team. I want to see them use their receivers a little better. And I'll talk a little bit about that when I get down to the who needs to step up part of the game, the breakdown. But I just look, and I'm going to talk about the defense here in a minute. I'm not going to spend as much time on the defense today because to me, for all the complaining about that final series, and it's justified. It was a collapse on the final series. The reality is that's the final series shouldn't have mattered. Your offense should have put that game away before Ohio State got the ball. When Ohio State got the ball at the end, it should have been a situation where Ohio State had to score as quickly as possible, then try to an onside kick and hope to get the ball back. That's what it should have been. Your offense is the side that kept you from winning that football game, and I want to see how they bounce back. And this is going to tell me a lot of that. Do they just pound Duke into oblivion and win a lower scoring football game? Okay, fine. If that makes you feel better, but that's not going to make you better for when you go play USC and when you get in the postseason, or if you get a rematch against Ohio State. You're going to need to be able to be more balanced, and they have been so far this year. But the pass game really let them down against Ohio State. It could just be a bad game. It just could have been a game where, some misses were there, and I'm going to have that later today. I said I was going to put it out today, and I will. The video where there were some opportunities for some big plays where guys were coming open against Ohio State, and the ball just didn't get where it needed to get to. And maybe that was just it. And you clean that stuff up, come out, and you do better. But it needs to be better because, as I said, Duke is a very, very good secondary. And the 2 additions at cornerback have been huge for them this season so far. So I really like what they're going to have. So this matchup for Notre Dame, when you look at the Notre Dame offense against the Duke defense, is incredibly important to this game. Let's look at the matchup between the Notre Dame defense and the Duke offense. This is the side of the ball that Notre Dame should thrive on in this matchup. This is the part of the matchup and the part of the game where, to me, Notre Dame has a pretty clear advantage, to be honest with you. One of the things that we had said coming into last week's game was, Notre Dame was great statistically. And when you look at what Notre Dame's rankings were last week, and I'll pull them up now and kind of go over it just to give some context. But Notre Dame was just really, really good when it came to being a team that could go out there and shut teams down. But the question we had coming into last week's game was, is Notre Dame good enough to do that against a better team? Or was it a situation where it was they beat up on bad teams and who had bad offenses, and which is true, by the way, and would they be able to kind of to improve and thrive in some of those other instances? And so we were going to know if that was the case. And when you look at where they were ranked last week, I have it right here. So Notre Dame defensively last week, they ranked 14th in the country in scoring defense. They were 3rd in total yards. They were 3rd in yards per play. They were 12th in red zone touchdown or red zone defense, 9th in red zone touchdowns. They were going into last week's game. They were ranked in rush defense. They ranked, let's see here, 42nd. 27th in yards allowed per attempt. Their pass defense was outstanding. They ranked 4th in passing yards allowed, 13th in passing yards per attempt. They were outstanding. But what we said was, okay, that's great, but you haven't been tested by anybody like Ohio State. And they were tested by Ohio State, and if you just look at statistically and for much of that game, they did very well against Ohio State. They had the one big play in the third quarter, and then the fourth quarter, the final drive collapse. But they did a lot of good things against Ohio State, and this Duke offense is just not as good. So if Notre Dame plays their game defensively and bounces back mentally from the Ohio State game, they should keep Duke in check. The only way Duke's going to really have a lot of success, in my opinion, offensively, is if Notre Dame just doesn't play well. And then if Riley Leonard goes off, that's going to be the big key. And yes, they have good players and they have good receivers. Their receivers are more shorter, shiftier guys. No, they want to get the ball in space. They present a unique challenge for Notre Dame, which I talked about yesterday. But at the end of the day, this is a game that Notre Dame's defense should dominate this matchup, and maybe dominates a bit much. They should be able to win this matchup. Are they capable of dominating Duke? Absolutely. But that is going to come across as a little bit of slap in the face to Duke. Very good offensive line, decent talent in running back, outstanding quarterback, good talent at wide receiver. I like this Duke football team, but Notre Dame should be better than them. We're going to get into really the matchup in this game that's going to matter the most. And Notre Dame obviously ranks higher in points per game, significantly higher in total offense, significantly higher in yards per play. Third down defense is in a similar range. Notre Dame is a top 10 red zone defense this year, which is just not being talked about enough because they were one of the worst red zone teams in college football last year. One of the two worst in college football last year. They ranked second to last in overall red zone percentage and dead last in red zone touchdown percentage. Notre Dame last year only stopped teams from scoring touchdowns on 5 drives the whole year. They've done that 11 times already this season, including stopping Ohio State inside the 5-yard line, and actually at the 1-yard line last week in this past weekend's game. So big improvement there. The big key to me is going to be down there at the bottom. Notre Dame's been a decent defense at not giving up big plays. Duke is not a big play offense. You got to make sure you continue that. And that's what killed Clemson. Clemson gave up too many big plays against Duke. And that's something that hurt him. There was, I think it was the third quarter, Riley Leonard had that long touchdown run in that game that put Duke ahead. It was a 44-yard run. If you go back and watch that play, he was hit 2-3 yards in the backfield. They missed a tackle. And then they missed another tackle he was running. And when in that situation for Notre Dame, they have to tackle him. They can't allow that play to happen because at that point in time, Clemson had really been outplaying Duke for a while. And that, they had a 7-6 lead at halftime. And then Riley Leonard comes out on 3rd and 3 at the 44-yard line, gets hit behind the line of scrimmage. You bring him down, drives over, Duke's punting, you get the ball back. Instead, you miss the tackle, he goes 44 yards, and he scores a touchdown. And that's when it really fell apart for Duke, Clemson, who did not score a touchdown in the second half, but never punted. Missed a field goal, fumble, turnover on downs, interception, turnover on downs. And the first fumble happened at the 7-yard line. And so, again, it was just a game where Clemson shot themselves in the foot a lot, and then Duke did a great job of taking advantage. Notre Dame can't allow that to happen in this game. Let's look at the matchup of the passing game. This is not where Duke is going to hurt Notre Dame. If it does, then that means Notre Dame has responded poorly to this past week's game. That's basically what that means. And this is just simply put, not a game that Notre Dame should give up a bunch of yards in the pass game. I like Duke's receivers; they're solid players. They're Jalen Cahoon is a really good athlete, really quality wide receiver. Jordan Moore, I like him a lot. I believe he's a converted quarterback who battled Riley Leonard for the starting job, got beat out, and they moved him a receiver. Those are good football players. Their tight end, Nicky Dalmolin, is a quality tight end, 6'4", 240, has 9 catches for over 100 yards in the season. He's a quality player. You can't turn loose. Notre Dame had some issues with covering the tight end last week. Now, of course, that was Cade Stover. He's a really good football player. But you've got to do better there. But simply put, this is a matchup Notre Dame should dominate. Notre Dame ranks top 10 in the country in fewest yards per game, touchdowns allowed, pass efficiency defense. They're second. They are 13th in yards allowed per attempt. I mean, they've given up a couple big plays in the past game, which are raised their yards per completion a little bit. That Notre Dame also ranks, I believe, second or third. Let me just go ahead and look it up real quick. They rank pass defense, completion percentage. They are first in lowest completion percentage allowed so far. And so they've got to keep that going. And when you watch Duke, Duke does a lot of stuff short and intermediate. I broke it down last night that they are not a team that throws the ball down the field a whole lot. They don't throw the ball down the field with a whole lot of success. They are working the short to intermediates, get their receivers in space, try to move the chains that way, complement the run game. And then if you make a mistake and you miss a tackle, that's when they're dangerous. They're going to run a lot of levels concepts. They're going to do some things trying to get the backs out of the backfield. Yeah, I talked about that from the matchup against Clemson. That one of the things that Duke did really well in the pass game. Duke only threw for 175 yards in that game, but Jordan Waters, their running back, had 46 yards out of the backfield on 3 catches, and then their other running back, Jaquez Moore, had a 28-yard catch. I believe that was on a wheel route. So their running backs had 74 yards. So 74 of their 175 yards in that game came from their running backs. And they had they were able to make some plays in that regard, and I liked what they did in that game. They're going to do some of that stuff against Notre Dame because Notre Dame is a team that likes to blitz, and that's going to be something that Notre Dame's going to have to be prepared for in this matchup. Actually, hold on one second. Let me look at this real quick. Yeah, Moore and Waters were the two receivers that running backs that had catches in that game. So Notre Dame's going to have to do a good job keeping that in check. But overall, if you play disciplined football and you tackle well, Duke's pass game's not going to hurt you too much. And Riley Leonard, he can make some plays with his arm. He's a good thrower. It's just that you're better there. You know, they have quality receivers. Notre Dame has arguably the best quarterback tandem in the country. The concern that I have is if Notre Dame is a blitz heavy team in this game, like we've seen them do a lot in the past, it's going to hurt you there. The other thing that concerns me, again, from a specific matchup, is Notre Dame has not been very good at protecting the middle of the field in the pass game. They've been very vulnerable there, and that's where Duke likes to attack. They like to attack the middle of the field a lot, and with different concepts. So if Notre Dame does not make adjustments, if Al Golden is not willing to look at his defense and say, hey, you know, we've got to do a pretty good job of protecting that part of the field, then they're gonna have some problems, and they're gonna struggle, because that's been certainly a sore spot for Notre Dame. We talked about NC State having success there. Central Michigan had some success there. Tennessee State should have had success there if they were just a better football team. But Duke on the season has already attempted 44 passes between 0 and 9 yards, and another 17 passes behind the line of scrimmage. That's for a team whose quarterback so far this season has only attempted 99 passes on the season. And of those 99 passes, let's just get down here to the specifics. Of those 99 passes, according to Pro Football Focus, 61 of them have been shorter than 9 yards past the line of scrimmage. So it is be disciplined. And if you're just going to vacate that part of the field with a bunch of pressures, then Duke will have some success throwing the football and moving the chains. It won't be like throwing for 350, but as far as moving the chains and being able to put points on the board. So they're going to have to thrive there. But here's the big matchup in this game. It's this one right here. Notre Dame is going to have to stop the Duke run game. And what makes it dangerous, and this ties into the pass game, is because when you look at Duke's passing offense and you say, well, man, they only rank, what is it? Let me go back to that number. They only rank 87th in the country in yards. They're only averaging 224 passing yards a game. You're like, that's not that good. And it's not very good. But what you don't see is how many of those plays come from the pass game. So when you look at Riley Leonard, for example, and you look at the success he's had, he's a guy that is going to have a lot of success running the football on plays that are not runs, but passes. So the way that Pro Football Focus has it broken down is of his yards this season, 106 of them have come on designed runs. 127 of them have come on scrambles. And so Notre Dame is going to have to be able to account for those yards in the scramble game. He didn't have any scramble yards against UConn. He only had 10 against Lafayette in a sloppy day. This according to Pro Football Focus. He had 41 scramble yards against Clemson, and he had 76 scramble yards against Northwestern. And that's the danger there. So you add that to the aspect of the pass game. Those are more passing yards, that's where the danger comes from. Now they account for rushing yards, which is why I'm looking here. So Duke averages 200 yards per game. They're 15th in college football in yards per attempt at 5.7. That's a really good number. But a big part of that, as we talked about, is the success of Riley Leonard. Riley Leonard right now is averaging 8.2 yards per carry. Now, their other backs are still good too. Jordan Waters is averaging 6.6, and Jaquez Moore is averaging 5.3. Jordan Waters is coming off of a game against Clemson where he had 63 yards and 11 carries. He went for 65 yards on 10 carries against Northwestern. He only had 18 on 7 carries against UConn, but he had been pretty good up until then. Jaquez Moore went for 43 yards on 8 carries against Clemson. So your two backs ran for 106 yards on 19 carries against Clemson. That's a good day of work when you're talking about what your quarterback also brings to the table. And against Northwestern, their two tailbacks combined for 126 yards on only 20 carries. So against the two Power 5 teams they've played, their backs have combined for over 100 yards in both games. And then when you add what Riley Leonard brings to the table, it makes it even more effective. I like Duke's run scheme a lot. They do a lot of off tackle, a lot of outside zone, stretch, those type of runs, which here's what makes that dangerous. Number one, their offensive line is not a big mauling physical line, but they're technically sound. They're decent athletes. It allows them to kind of get those fast swipe plays going where they can open up creases and vertical insertions for the run game. But the other thing that it does is when you look at it, it makes it a little harder to defend the quarterback. So they'll do those long runs and he'll pull that sucker and take it out the back door, or they'll do that stuff and he'll do a vertical insertion himself. It can be challenging, and it requires you to be physical up front. It allows you to be gap correct up front, and it allows you to be disciplined from a play calling and play execution standpoint. Otherwise, they're going to hurt you. The other thing about it too is Duke does a great job on the season of limiting negatives. So let's go back to the pass game here real quick. Duke has only allowed 2 sacks all season. They rank 4th in college football in fewest sacks allowed per game. They rank 16th in the country in tackles for loss allowed per game. Fewest tackles allowed per game. Notre Dame has stunk in both areas. Notre Dame ranks 112th in sacks per game. They rank 130th out of 133 teams in tackles for loss per game. That can't continue this poorly against Duke. It can't. And Duke has also been very good at ripping off long runs. They have 5 runs in 4 games of over 30 yards. Notre Dame's only allowed 1 all year. They allowed that last week against Ohio State. So something's going to have to give here. And Notre Dame's numbers are a lot better than their statistics look, in my opinion. They've been a pretty good rushing team all year, in my opinion, and have been pretty stout against the run, especially when you consider that they've got a game against Navy under their belt. Central Michigan went for 131. Ohio State was only 126. Navy was only 126. Tennessee State was 89. NC State was 84. That has to continue. But none of those teams, including NC State, had a quarterback that's as dynamic as Riley Leonard. And that's the big sort of asterisk about this matchup, is what he brings to the table. The defensive line is going to have to play well, and Al Golden's going to have to be on top of his game. And I'm very curious to see kind of what he brings to the table, because this is the matchup that always kind of concerns me when you talk about a guy that's been in the NFL for a long time, because they don't face kids like this where the running game from the quarterback is such an emphasis. I mean, other than Lamar Jackson with Baltimore, other than that, you don't really face this type of attack in the NFL. And that's where a guy that's been in the NFL as long as Al Golden's been in the NFL can be problematic because of what this type of guy can bring to the table. And so Notre Dame is going to have to be, he's going to have to be on top of his game. And I'm very curious to see kind of how he handles that type of weapon. And Notre Dame didn't really face that a ton last year. If you think about it, I mean, Caleb Williams was that kind of quarterback, and they struggled containing him in that game. Clemson didn't really have that kind of quarterback. Syracuse didn't really have that kind of quarterback. UNLV didn't have that kind of quarterback. Stanford didn't. BYU didn't. North Carolina did to a degree, and they did a nice job shutting down Drake May, but it's a different type of run game, a much more physical offensive line than what North Carolina had. So you're going to have to be on your game. And if Notre Dame can't stop the Duke running game and they allow, and it doesn't even mean that they go for 200 yards, but if they're just 4, 5, 6, 3rd and 5, and Riley Leonard scrambles and picks up the first down, that's going to make this game a lot more competitive than it should be. As much as I love Duke and what Mike Elko has done, this game should be a Notre Dame double-digit win. But it could also end up being a Notre Dame loss because Duke is good enough if you don't play well to beat you. And that's going to be the interesting part and this stat is going to be this part of the matchup is going to be a big part of that. Notre Dame is going to have to shut down the run. If Duke winning and losing is ultimately determined by Riley Leonard and the receiver's ability to throw the football, that's advantage Notre Dame because that's where Notre Dame has the biggest talent advantage. We just saw what they did to the Ohio State receivers, who are excellent, by the way, excellent players. And outside of a couple clutch plays, Notre Dame did a lot to keep that pass game in check. Ohio State only threw for, 240 yards in this past game against them. 6.3 yards per attempt the only time that they've been lower than 6.3 yards per attempt in the last, let's go down here, the last 2-3 years. The last time that they were held to that low yards per attempt in a non-50-mile-an-hour wind day was back in 2020 in the national title game against Alabama. Held them to 5.9. That's the last time Ohio State was this low, 6.3 yards per attempt, to start a season. So I thought Notre Dame did a really nice job there. They are going to win that matchup if it's about your guys versus our guys. Where it can get problematic is if Duke is able to balance the run game and if Notre Dame can't contain Riley Leonard. That's where Duke can kind of negate the talent advantage that Notre Dame has in this matchup. And it's going to make for a huge factor in this game. So it's the Notre Dame pass offense against the Duke pass defense is the matchup to watch on when Notre Dame's offense is on the field. When the Notre Dame defense is on the field, it's can they shut down the run game and can they keep Riley Leonard, prevent Riley Leonard from taking this game over with his running ability and then ability to make plays off structure, out of structure, off platform, all those type of expressions. They have to not let him take this game over. And because if he doesn't take the game over, I don't think they're good enough to beat Notre Dame. It would only come down to then at that point in time, Notre Dame beating themselves with a bunch of bad turnovers on offense and give Duke easy points. That's going to be the big key in the game. Next part of the breakdown is going to be step up time. And when you look at this Duke game, who are the people to me that have to step up and play their best, coach their best against Duke? And to a degree, it's sort of a bounce back type of conversation. But the other part of it is specific to Duke with a little bit of a hindsight on questions that came out of the last game. But it really does come down to who are going to be the standouts for Notre Dame in this game. Who are the players that the coaching staff needs to ensure are put in position to be successful? And then those players have to then step up and be successful. And we're going to start on the offensive side of the ball because that's what we do. The first player to me that is going to have to play well in this game, in my opinion, is Tobias Merriweather. And it's not so much that I'm disappointed in the way he's played. I've been more disappointed in the lack of really trying to force the issue to get him the football. One of my concerns really all season, I've voiced this many times, has been Notre Dame's unwillingness to try to force the issue with some of their receivers in games where you could take advantage of forcing the issue to try to get them going. And Tobias Merriweather is one. And I'm going to talk about another one here in the coaching section, but I want to start with Tobias first. Now, part of this also is Tobias also has to play better. Tobias has to play with a greater sense of urgency coming off the line. The thing about Tobias is he's a long strider. The reason he was a really good 200-meter guy in high school, but not necessarily a state champion in the 100-meter, is because he's one of those guys that is he needs some steps to kind of build up his speed. That's fine. There are things Will Fuller's that way. There are some things you can do to take advantage of that, where you have to tell your quarterback, hey, stay on this a little bit more. Some things where you maybe design some opportunities, say, hey, we're gonna take a shot here. It seems that Notre Dame has been so focused on just not wanting to throw an incomplete pass or make a mistake that they're just not willing to be more aggressive. And so I want to see that change a little bit, but Tobias has to kind of force that issue. He's got to be better with his releases. He's got to play with a little bit more urgency coming off of his routes, out of his stance. Those are things he has to work on. But it also comes down to what Sam's got to say, hey, look, give those guys those chances to make those plays. And it comes down to the coaches to say, hey, look, you've got to do more to get this guy to football. And it's going to sound kind of funny, but it's kind of like relying on Jaden Greathouse and Rico Flores, honestly, is a little bit lazy. And let me explain what I mean. Rico and Jaden are very talented players, but they came to Notre Dame extremely advanced and ready to play. They showed up that way. And instead of kind of forcing the issue with some of your more talented guys that weren't quite as advanced, like a Tobias, like a Chris Tyree, who I'm going to talk about in a second, you've kind of relied on more of the advanced guys. And I just think that's a little bit lazy might not be the right word. Easy. It's the easy out. That's a better word, because I don't think this Notre Dame coaching staff offensively is lazy at all. I don't think anyone on the Notre Dame coaching staff is lazy. So I'm going to take back that lazy term, because I think it will be perceived in a way that I don't mean it. I think easy is the way I think the best way to explain it. It's easy to take the advanced players that can already execute certain things and just say, let's roll with them, as opposed to saying, no. This kid is a kid we're going to need to beat Ohio State. This kid we're going to need to beat USC. We're going to need him to beat this team. And we've got to force the issue with these players. And they haven't done that. And that's, to me, stunted the development of the pass game a little bit. And this isn't hindsight 2020. This isn't, you struggled against Ohio State. The pass game was doing all these good things statistically beforehand. I've been talking about this when the pass game was putting up good numbers, where you're going to need to get this guy going. You need to get that guy going. And we talked about some of the release issues that the receivers have had. So this isn't new. It just finally bit him in the butt on Saturday. And so they're going to have to look in the mirror and say, hey, look, what we were doing worked against teams we were way better than. But when we finally played someone on our level, it didn't work. And, we're going to have to figure out ways to get that going and shift our approach a little bit. And so to me, that's a big key for Duke, because I think there are some opportunities in this game, in my opinion, to be able to go at Duke a little bit down the field. It's not easy, but partly because they're not a great pass rushing team, I do think there are some things Notre Dame can do with their drop back game. I believe there are some things that Notre Dame can do with their play action game, where they can take some advantages, take some opportunities to get the ball down the field, take advantage of certain matchups, especially if they can figure out ways to get those guys matched up against safeties, because I think that's where Duke is a little bit more vulnerable when it comes to the throwing game. And if you look at Sam Hartman last year against Duke, now again, the corners are better, but the safeties are the same. Last year against Duke, Sam Hartman completed 6 of 11 deep balls in that game last year for 162 yards. He also completed 8 of 15 shorts throws intermediate. So he went 14 of 29 for 255 yards and 3 touchdowns on throws of 10 yards or more against Duke last year. I'm not saying you need to throw it that many times down the field, but you definitely have to throw it down the field more than you did against Ohio State. And their utter just unwillingness to even think about attacking that part of the field. They took 2 deep shots really the whole game. 3, because they had the one that was a penalty. They went 0 for 2 and then another completion. And my concern is 2 of the 3 shots you took were to Jaden Thomas and Rico Flores, good football players. But are go routes really where Rico Flores and Jaden Thomas are at their best? I don't think that it is. So you're not using their skills. You say, well, Rico just he caught a deep ball where he was pretty well covered against Central Michigan. That's not Ohio State. And so to me, I don't feel the one knock I have on this Notre Dame offensive staff, who's done a lot of good things so far, is this right here. They're not doing enough to push some of the more talented vertical players into the offense. It's relying on efficiency and those type of things. And that's fine. Efficiency is good. But what do I always say? To be a great offense, you need efficiency and explosiveness. And they've been able to rely on some of those big plays out of different situations, but not really making those big play guys more of a part of the offense. That's got to change, and it's got to start this week. So it's also Tobias stepping up. He's got to play better. He's got to do a better job in certain situations, but they need to also make sure that they're utilizing him more effectively. And then making sure that they're using Jaden Greathouse and they're using Rico Flores and they're using Jaden Thomas in situations that are playing to their strengths greater. Number 2, Holden Stace. Holden Stace is going to be a big part of this game. Notre Dame's banged up at receiver. They're going to be a little limited at the receiver position. We've talked about that, right? And with all the injuries, Deion Colsey's out with a knee. He's going to be out for a while. Jaden Thomas has a hamstring. And here's the thing. Jaden is a possession receiver, and he's a good possession receiver. Jaden Thomas right now leads the Notre Dame offense in catches with 13. He's second on the team with 195 receiving yards. He's a possession guy. He is not a stretch the field kind of guy. And so you're losing him. You're losing Deion, who's more of a vertical player. You're looking at now. You have Tobias. You have Chris Tyree. You have Jaden Greathouse. You have Rico Flores. Matt Salerno's out. Deion's out. You could maybe get Braylon James going. I wouldn't be opposed to that. Take a couple deep shots to him in this game. But the key is going to be you're going to see a lot more of the 12 personnel stuff, which they've done a ton of. And you're going to see, I think, more of the 21 and 22 personnel stuff. And Holden Stace had a big breakout against NC State, right? 4 catches, 115 yards. The problem is in the other 4 games, he's only caught 2 passes for 8 yards. He has not built on that game against NC State. We have seen Mitchell Evans come out and become sort of that number 1 tight end, which is not surprising. We thought Mitchell Evans was going to be the number 1 tight end. You know, he had 4 for 61 against Tennessee State. He's coming off of a 7-catch, 75-yard game against Ohio State. The problem is it's kind of going back to what we've talked about in the past, which is where Notre Dame seems to only be able to get like 1 tight end going at a time. So if Mitchell's doing something, Holden's an afterthought. If Holden's doing something, Mitchell's an afterthought. So the game where Holden Stace went off for 4 catches for he had 4 catches for was 115 yards and 2 touchdowns. Mitchell Evans only had 1 catch for 2 yards. He had a drop as well, but he wasn't really, part of what Notre Dame was doing in that particular game. You're going to need both of those guys to be more factors in the pass game against Ohio State or against Duke. And that means not just using them in the tight stuff, but also being willing to get them outside and do some stuff with them on the perimeter as well. So if people say, well, how are you going to replace Jaden Thomas? That's my answer right there. Holden Stace. That's my number 1 answer. I'm all for getting Braylon James going and seeing what he can do. I'm all for it. I don't think Braylon James is a 5-year player. He may not be ready to play a ton now. He may be a more of a Golden Tate type of guy where Golden Tate really didn't know what he was doing his first year. But here's what I know about Braylon James. He's tall and he's really fast. And so he's a guy that can help you. I would activate him and I'd get him going. He's already played 2 games. I know you run the risk of burning his red shirt, but guys, here's the deal. If Braylon James is the player you think he is, he's not going to be here for a 5th year no matter what he does as a freshman. He could do nothing the next 2 years, break out and be gone. Look at Miles Boykin. Miles Boykin redshirted, only caught 6 passes in year 2. Year 3 becomes part of the rotation. He has 1 breakout season as a senior, gone to the NFL. Doesn't use his 5th year. So Braylon James, if Braylon James is coming back for a 5th year, either A, he's not as good as I think he is, or B, he had an injury. And if he has an injury, you're probably getting a red shirt out of him anyway. So why not? Why not try to get him going? He brings a skill set that you don't have a lot of on your offense. That's why I would consider activating Braylon James. But What you do know, what you do know is that Holden Stace can play. And so trying to find more ways where you can be a more effective vertical passing team out of your 12 personnel is going to be important. And out of their 12 personnel, Notre Dame has thrown the ball a decent amount, but it's all short to intermediate stuff. They're going to have to find ways to attack down the field out of their 12 personnel packages. And that means that Holden Stace front and center is a big time player this week. Not meaning he needs to play well and you don't need Mitchell Evans. It's Mitchell Evans, keep doing what you're doing against Ohio State. Keep doing that. Keep being that guy. But now they need Holden Stace to also be kind of that NC State player as well. That helps overcome that a little bit. So those are different things that I would love to see them do with those two players coming out of this game. I'm looking in the chat. I think it's my guy, Brian Felton. I think I see Texan. I think that's the same Brian Felton that I went to high school with. I think the only Notre Dame fan that I knew when I was at Kempsville. I think it's the same guy. So thanks for stopping in, Brian. Third guy that's going to have to step up in this game offensively for Notre Dame is Jared Parker. And Jared Parker is a guy that I'm very happy with what he's done so far this year. I lobbed my complaints about the 4th and 1 call. I made my not complaints, disagreements about the final series known. I don't think the final series was as bad as people made it out to be, because I was discussing today with someone who was making a great football argument. It was a good conversation that I rather enjoyed, but his comment was, some head scratching play calls. I'm like, well, I don't agree with his play calls, but they weren't head scratching. You absolutely understood them. They were doing what they had done the whole game. Audric runs, then they go to the two back personnel, bring in Jeremiah Love, and he rips it off. I mean, they had been doing that stuff the whole game. I just would have done something different there. That's more of a disagreement than saying, oh, bad job. The one call that I just hated was the 4th and 1. But for the most part, Jared Parker's done a lot of good things. But there are things that he needs to do better, in my opinion. You're 5 games in now. And number one, I just want to see Coach Parker bounce back from last week. And your offense scored 14 points. Your offense didn't get it done. What do you do as the leader of that offense to really get these guys going and playing at their best? Do you come out? Are you kind of conservative again? Do you come out aggressive? Do you come out too aggressive, which is the kind of the overcorrection that you can make? And say, hey, look, guys, we're putting that behind us, and we're going to come out and we're going to play well, and that's all fine and dandy. But you, as a competitor, need to say, we've got something we got to improve, but also we've got some things we got to get better at. And one thing that they have to get better at is using the speed that they have more effectively in the pass game. One of my biggest frustrations from the Ohio State game, and y'all know I love Jaden Greathouse, love Rico Flores, but we should not see as many snaps as we saw of Rico and Jaden Thomas and Jaden Greathouse in combinations together as much as we did, because you have no vertical threat against a good team in that situation. And Ohio State knew it. And so how they use their receiving rotation, to me, needs to change. And they're getting into a little bit of the old regime of playing the guys that are safe, that are the good route runners, that are the guys that can move the chains, and being less willing to say, let's go. Great. You took deep shots against Central Michigan. Don't care. You took none against Ohio State. Not really. Oh, great. You had some big plays against NC State. You didn't have any against Ohio State. Those are the games you're evaluated by. So I want to see Coach Parker make some adjustments to say, we've got to play Chris Tyree more than 12 snaps a game. And if you look at the Notre Dame season so far, and you look at what Chris Tyree has done so far, they spent all this time in the offseason getting Chris Tyree to transition to wide receiver. And then you come out in the season and he's ripping off big plays. I mean, Chris Tyree, somebody's complaining, Chris Tyree just doesn't make any plays. I'm like, you know that Chris Tyree is Notre Dame's leading receiver in yards right now, right? He's got 241 yards on only 9 catches. And when you consider the fact that those 9 catches and 241 yards have only come on 79 total snaps in 5 games, The guy's playing 15.8 snaps a game. So basically 16 snaps a game. That's it. Highest of the season is 22. Next highest is 18. He's played 14 in 2 games and 11. I'm sorry. That's not enough. He's only played 50 of his 79 snaps have been pass plays. So it's when Chris Tyree is in the game, there's a pretty good chance that you're throwing the football. 50 of his 79 snaps have been pass plays. So there's over a 60% chance when Chris Tyree's in the game that they're throwing the football. I don't like that. I want to see Chris Tyree carry the ball. I want to see Chris Tyree be used in different ways. Use his speed, even if it's not to get him the ball. If there's more ways to try and get him the ball with just a bunch of seam routes, it's like all they had him run on Saturday. Ran him on one cross, he catches it and runs for 20 some yards. You've got to find more ways to get your speed going. You've got to find more ways to utilize Tobias Merriweather's downfield speed. You got to find more ways to utilize Chris Tyree in the pass game. I'm not talking 50 snaps a game, but I'm talking about you got to find ways to get him the football more, because when he's touched it, he's been very dynamic. He's got 9 catches for 241 yards. He's averaging 26.8 yards per catch. He's not dropped a single pass so far this season. He's done what you've been asking to do. You need to activate him a little bit more, in my opinion. You need to get him at least 10 to 15 more snaps a game. Be more willing to use him in different parts of the game. You're using Rico Flores and Jaden Greathouse and Jaden Thomas to go in motion, and you're shocked Ohio State's not concerned about it. And then when you do a jet sweep, you run it into the boundary. It's just kind of one of those things where that stuff's wasted motion. That's wasted movement, in my opinion, to run jet sweeps like that when you're running the football. Guy like Chris Tyree can be a little bit more of a weapon. They need to start utilizing him more because that's got to be a part of what they're doing. And somebody just said, I think the issue is Tyree's not a good run blocker. You're kind of missing the point, right? They do a ton of jet motion. You can be effective in one of 2 ways. A, use him as a motion player. Number 2, what's the other thing I've discussed? Do more RPOs. If Chris Tyree's out there in the run game and you're running RPOs, bubble screens, now screens, slants, glances, things like that, then he's blocking by occupying those guys with the pass game. And if teams don't respect that, then you pull and throw the RPO. That was supposedly going to be one of the reasons that you brought Jared Parker in. Now, I don't know if that's Jared Parker not wanting to do that, or if that's Marcus Freeman. Hey, we're going to control the clock and do all this kind of stuff. I don't know who's the decision maker here, but the fact of the matter is you've got to find more ways to utilize the speed you have. That includes also Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. That I started to see on Saturday, and we're starting to see him use Love on some wheels and things like that. So I do like that, but we need to see a little bit more of it. We need to see more of utilizing your speed on the perimeter with your run game, because you can't have this type of dynamic where, when this guy's in the game, you're 60% good chance that you're going to be throwing the football. All right. Run RPOs. Do different aspects where you put him in motion and you're using him to occupy a guy with a reverse action. And here's the thing, guys, if you're running a reverse fake, Chris Tyree's blocking someone just by his presence. Okay, that's how football works. It's not always just about stalk blocking. And first and second of all, Chris Tyree's not a bad run blocker. It's not great, but he can get in people's way. But a good football coach is going to take a weapon like that and say, okay, maybe he's not a guy that we're going to stalk block all game, but we're going to utilize him in the run game more effectively to where that 63% gets down to about 50-50. And now you're using him on some things, because if he runs a reverse or jet action and the defense doesn't respond to it, guess what you do next play or 2 plays later? You run the flip and reverse. We saw Tommy Reese do this a couple years ago in 2020 at Georgia Tech when Chris Tyree's a freshman. They went with a 2-back alignment. They ran a stretch play to Kyron Williams, and they ran Chris Tyree was outside, and he ran a reverse action. No, they didn't give it to him. They just ran a stretch play. Georgia Tech ignored it, didn't react to it. Very next play, they ran the same exact play, but this time they handed it off on Tyree in the reverse, and he runs for 25 yards. First down, right? Like you either occupy someone with his action, or if they don't respect it, you then give him the ball, right? That's how it works. That's how this offense has to be. And so to me, I got no issue with Jaden Greathouse playing. I love Jaden Greathouse. He's been their most kind of accountable receiver. I mean, that guy, when you need to play, he's made it. Rico Flores is doing a good job. I love what Rico brings to the table. But to beat USC, to beat Ohio State, to beat Clemson, to beat Georgia, to beat Texas, to beat Washington, you're going to need more from Tobias Merriweather. You're going to need more from Chris Tyree. You're going to need more from your speed players doing speed things. And until they're willing to do that and not be so we're just kind of better than you and we're just going to lean on you, then they're just not going to be, they're just not going to be there. I also want to point this out because I'm really tired of seeing this. We see a comment that says shout out to Coach Park, Coach Ludwig. It says hashtag experience, hashtag not experience for Jared Parker. That is such a absurd thing to say. Need I remind you? Now, y'all know I'm an Andy Park and I like Andy Ludwig. But need I remind you that the weekend that you're complaining about Jared Parker scoring 14 points and having 350 something yards of offense against Ohio State, that Utah at home against UCLA had 14 points and 219 yards of offense. In their 3 games against FBS opponents, Utah has gone for 270, 377, and 219 on offense. Do I need to remind y'all that last year that Andy Ludwig in November had an offense that went for 17 points and only 326 yards against Oregon? So spare me the whole oh well, if Andy Ludwig was the coach, this would happen. You don't know that. And I love Andy Ludwig. That was the guy that I wanted as the OC. But let's not be petty and about this and pretend that the first 4 games under Jared Parker didn't happen. That some of the things that they did on Saturday were really good. Jared Parker, to me, was not what he needed to be on about 4 plays. He's got to be better. Some of the stuff was on the quarterback. Has got to throw to the open guy. The receivers have got to do a better job over here. You've got to execute. There was a play in the 4th quarter where Chris Tyree is about to come open on the seam for what might have been a 90-something yard touchdown. And Blake Fisher, who otherwise played an excellent game on Saturday, gets knocked back into Sam, and Sam can't block him. It's a very well-designed play. So let's not get into that stuff. Let's not play that petty game because the fact of the matter is he's done a lot of good things. Now we got to learn what he does after adversity, and we're going to do that this weekend. So, yes, he's got to get better, but let's not act like the guy that we all wanted has also put some phenomenal offense on the field this year. Nor did he do it last year all the time with his starting quarterback. Coaches have bad games. Jared Parker didn't even have a bad game. He didn't have a good enough game. Coaches are like players. Sometimes they don't have it. Andy Ludwig, the guy that I wanted to be the offensive coordinator this offseason, absolutely had bad games last year. Had a bad game against Washington State. 21 points, 344 yards, 4.99 per carry. Worse than what we saw against Ohio State. Had one against Oregon last year. Had one against Penn State in the bowl game last year. It happens. And so I don't particularly care much for those type of responses. Clark Lee had less experience as a coach than Jared Parker had. Notre Dame went to the playoff his first year. Jared Parker's going to be fine. He's been fine for a lot of the season. So let's not do that. Let's talk defense here, folks. Let's get into the defensive players that got to step up. Number 1, this is a big one for me. Jordan Botelho has got to step up. Now, Jordan Botelho has actually been a pretty good run defender for Notre Dame this year. And he's going to need to continue that this week, but he has got to find something out on as a pass rusher. And I broke the stats down last night. You have a guy that is your primary viper, and he's got 8 pressures on the entire season in 5 games. That's not anywhere close to being good enough. Not anywhere close. And in this particular game, a guy like Jordan Patojo is going to have to be a big part of this game. He's going to have some of those pressures, those impact pressures. I'm not worried about sacks as much, although sacks are great because, sacks are great. It's just they're not always the end all be all. It is about pressure. Pressure leads to mistakes. Pressure leads to sacks. Pressure leads to fumbles. Pressure leads to incompletions. Pressure leads to interceptions. Pressure leads to negative gains in other instances, and they can lead to penalties, throwing the ball away. Intentional grounding like we saw against Ohio State, which Jordan Patojo was the guy that got the pressure, I believe, on that, was one of the guys that got a pressure on that play. I think Mills or Cross had the first pressure, and then I believe Patojo finished it off. And John A1, by the way, I agree with that point you just made in the chat. I wonder about that too. But you get a guy who's just not bringing you much from a pass rush standpoint. He's going to have to step up. He's going to have to step up in this game. And part of it too, and I'll get into this in a second, is going to be on the coaching. They need Jordan Patojo to be a much more impactful pass rusher in this game. I think there's two things they can do to help Jordan Patojo, and this is on the coaches. Number one, you've got to do more than just the one rush you're letting him do right now. I know Jordan Patojo's counter moves. You've got to do more things to let him rush wider at times. You've got to let him have some counter moves. You've got to help him have a little bit more of a takeoff stance where he's not so square. There's some different things that he can do there. The other part too is take some of the pressure off of him from a snap standpoint. So the second part to me is when you look at a guy like Jordan Patojo and the number of snaps he's playing, and then the lack of snaps that you're seeing behind him, to me, that's something that is going to have to be looked at, in my opinion. Jordan Patojo is playing a lot of snaps this season, and I just feel like this is a situation where they're going to have to find some ways to limit that. Now, his overall numbers are not terrible. He played 27 against Navy, 32 against Tennessee State, 31 against Central Michigan. But he played over 50 snaps against NC State and over 50 snaps against Ohio State this past week. And the reality is he's not Isaiah Foskey. He doesn't have Isaiah Foskey's length. He doesn't have Isaiah Foskey's, size. I don't know that Jordan Patojo is in a position where that's ideal for him. I don't. And they're going to, I think, get about, let's say 10 to 15 of the snaps off of his legs. And then when you get in the fourth quarter in a game like you had against Ohio State, where you need a big stop, you need a big pass rush, take 10, 15 snaps off of Jordan Patojo's legs, let him be just a tad fresher. Maybe he then has the chance to go make that kind of play. And so that's something that I'd like to see the staff do to take some of that burden off of Jordan Patojo to where maybe he can be a little bit fresher in the fourth quarter of some of these big games. And if they can do that, then I think Jordan can take off, but they desperately need him to play better in the pass game. It's not just coaching, it's him too. He's got to play better in the pass game, and he's got to be on the field when he's supposed to be on the field. That's obviously a pretty important part of this as well. The other guy that needs to step up to me this week is Maris Liufau. Maris has done a lot of good things this year. He has. But he did not play well against Ohio State. Some of the lack of production stuff is overblown. The way that Notre Dame was using him, he was not always in position to make plays on the football. So the whole, somebody with a childish comment about, look, Maris wasn't put in position to make a lot of tackles. First of all, he was not tackleless. The stat keepers, whoever, did a poor job. He was in at least 3 tackles when I went back and watched the game. So he was not held tackleless, just in the stat sheet, maybe. But in real life and watching film, he wasn't. But he's got to be more decisive. And he wasn't decisive in this game. He had done a lot of good things coming into this game. But in the run game, he just was not aggressive enough coming downhill against Ohio State. He's going to have to be better. He's going to have to be disciplined. He's going to be a guy that's going to have a big role in making sure that Riley Leonard doesn't go off. That's the other part. So part of it's, bounce back from Ohio State, get back to being the guy you were the first 4 games. One bad game from Maris does not eliminate the fact that he played 4 pretty good football games before that. They're going to need him to bounce back from that. And number 2, he's going to play a very important role in limiting Riley Leonard's effectiveness. Riley Leonard made the Duke linebackers not look like studs. Notre Dame guys can't allow that to happen. So as a whole, the linebackers have to play better. I wouldn't be shocked if we see a little bit more of Jack Kaiser in this game. And I know that Duke likes to do a lot of their, 11 personnel stuff, but so what? If Duke is throwing quick game and trying to get the ball outside and not running the ball and not letting Riley Leonard get going, that's advantage Notre Dame. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a little bit more of that at times in this particular game. But Maris is going to play a big role in keeping Riley Leonard contained. There's no doubt, and he's going to have to play well. And then the third guy, I'm going to stick to coaching here, is Al Golden. Coach is going to have to get his guys to bounce back. That's the part is your job as the leader of that side of the ball. Hey, look, yes, take ownership for what you need to take ownership for. Hey, guys, like I read the article that I read the article that Sean Stiers did for Irish Breakdown about this particular topic. And, Al Golden's kind of explaining why he did the things that he did in that game. And you're like, okay, yeah, I get it, but I mean, it's fine that you're explaining it. That's good. But what it can't be is justifying it with the standpoint of like, well, this is why I did it and it didn't work, but I would do it again. Look, I'm all for, look, as a coach, I promise you, I can lie to you and say, hey, every call I made was great. And you wouldn't really be able, unless you have weird access to Division III and 1AA games from over 10 years ago, almost 20 years ago now. I could lie and say every call that I made was great. And when I was on record setting offensive teams, that every call I made, I promise you that's not true. I've said this before. There's times where I made calls where I'm like, that was a dumb call. My dad would be like, it went for a touchdown. I was like, yeah, because that dude, my guy is really flipping good. But that was on me. I should have done something different. We just were better than that team. And that happens. And so it's one thing to kind of explain it away, and that's fine. Explain it. You were asked the question. But it can't be well, I'd do it again. We just got to execute better. We got to do this. I don't want to be in a situation where Al Golden is sitting there, and I'm not saying he is or isn't. I don't know. This is why it's important for him to bounce back and say, man, if DJ Brown just makes that one play, then I'm the hero this week and no one's complaining about me. And he's right. I mean, he's right. That's true. If DJ Brown picks off that pass on the final drive, you held Ohio State to 10 points, and you'd have held Ohio State to barely over 300 yards, and you'd have come up with 2 huge fourth quarter stops, and you're the hero. You are. But that's not what happened. And you had chances to make better calls in certain situations and get your guys in the field, and you didn't do it. So you've got to take ownership and say, okay, but now let's rally past it. Let's move past it. This happened. That's on me. Not going to let that happen again. Now let's go get ready for Duke. Come up with a good game plan, but be willing to look in the mirror and say, through 5 games, we struggle here and here. We're not disruptive at all in the run game. We rank 130th out of 133 teams in tackles for loss per game. That's not good. We rank 100 what was it? What did I have in the stats earlier? Like 112th in sacks. They've had 7 sacks in 5 games. And they rank 112th in sacks per game. It's not good enough. It's not good enough. And why? Okay, what we're doing is not working. We've blitzed the linebackers over 100 times this year. They've only got like 9 hits on the quarterback. It's not good enough. So what can you do as a coach to say, okay, we need to still be disciplined. We need to be aggressive. We need to play to our strengths, which is our corners and experience at linebackers. So, but maybe the way that we're going about this is not giving us the chance to really play to our full potential. There's doing a lot of good things defensively, folks. I mean, listen, the Notre Dame defense right now is holding its first 5 opponents at 12.8 points per game. They just held Ohio State to 17 points. They're 7th in the country after 5 games in yards per game, 6th in yards per play, 5th in red zone touchdown percentage, 10th in red zone defense overall. They're doing a lot of good things. This isn't about an overhaul. This is about what are the adjustments we can make to say against the better teams like Ohio State in the big moments, we aren't going to give up that 61-yard gain. We aren't going to give up that fourth quarter drive, and that we're going to be more of the team that made those stops, because for all the good things you think is Ohio State still got stopped on the 1-yard line. Ohio State had 2 other drives, and in in Notre Dame territory. So Ohio State's offense also didn't capitalize on some opportunities. Part of that was on the Notre Dame defense, just like I said, part of what Notre Dame stops were on the Ohio State defense. So you've got to be willing to say, as I've always said, it's not about the result, it's about the process. And sometimes you've got to look and say the results have been pretty good now, but when you look forward and you see the Duke offense and you see USC and you think of who Texas is, and you've got to look at college football and say the Washingtons and the Texases and teams like that, is what we're doing now going to be good enough when we play those teams, when we play USC? And the reality is it isn't. You just can't repeat what you did against Ohio State, because some of the plays where you tackled Kyle McCord for a 2-yard gain, Caleb Williams is running for 20. That's just the reality of it. Riley Leonard's running for 20. And so we want to say, hey, look, yeah, what we're doing right now is pretty good, but it needs to be better. And if you can do that, then, I'm good with it, because, yeah, you held Ohio State to 17 points, but you're still giving up in your 2 games against Power 5 opponents this year over 20 points a game, which is not bad, but you're not 12.8 points. You've dominated some bad teams. You dominated Navy, who's not that good. You dominated Tennessee State, whose offense is terrible, even for the 1AA level. And you got to be able to say, hey, look, we've got to be better. We can be better, and here's how we can get better. We've got to get Jordan Patel better. How do we do that? Here's how we do that. We've got to get Marist. We're using him to blitz a lot, but he's just not getting home a lot. Okay, what can we do to change that? Is there something we can do with him to make him better? Do we need to not trigger him as much in that way? Is there something that we can do maybe to adjust and adapt? There's all those type of things you have to be willing to look at and say, hey, we can be better. We need to be better, and we're going to make those changes. And if Al Golden's willing to do that, then they're going to be fine, because they're still pretty good on defense. They're going to be real fine. Matter of fact, they're going to be great if he's willing to make those changes. But if he's not, and it's just same old, keep doing what we're doing and just doing a little bit, because what was my big complaint about Brian Kelly? You guys remember this. After the 2014 season or 2015 season, Brian Kelly comes out and says, we just got to make a few more plays and, coach a little harder, or play a little better and coach a little harder, and, do all that kind of stuff, and we'll be fine. And I was like, yeah, they ain't going to get it done. And then they come out the next year and it collapsed, because they didn't have the sort of you didn't have the erasers. That's basically the way to look at it. He didn't have the erasers. He didn't have Jalen Smith. He didn't have Sheldon Day. He didn't have Romeo Okwara. He didn't have Kavari Russell. He didn't have a lot of those guys that were the erasers for the previous season. And so, to me, it's not about looking at the stats. It's about saying, hey, this is how we got to best use our personnel. Maybe on third down, instead of rushing Marist, you play Jalen Sneed as a pass rusher. I don't think Jalen Sneed is warranted playing more snaps. I think his snaps need to be used in different ways. Maybe on third down, that you need to start getting Josh Burnham more involved in the pass rush game. There's a lot of things you can look at and say, hey, these are things we can do to be more effective and to better utilize our personnel to where we're not just a good defense, but we're a great defense. And that's going to come down to coaching. And I like a lot of things that Al Golden's done, just like I like a lot of things that Jared Parker's done. But neither one of you, when the game was on the line, did what you needed to do to win that game. And that's got to be the next step. And if they can make those adjustments, so this is why I'm fired up. Like, if they can make those adjustments, and if they're willing to look in the mirror and say, hey, we're doing a lot of good things, but we need to be better. We can be better. And here's how we adjust it. Then this team's going to really take off, and it'll start this weekend. If they don't, then they're going to lose another game. I believe that. They're going to lose another game, because the margin for error is still a little too thin for me in this regard. So those are the guys, to me, that need to step up for Notre Dame as they get ready for the next part of the schedule, which is still going to be really, really tough. So I'd said before that I was going to do a breakdown of the quarterbacks, but shocker, I talked a little longer than I wanted to. So I do want to spend the next 10 minutes or so answering some questions, and then we'll talk. I'll talk about the quarterbacks in next week's midweek mailbag. or midweek rundown. So I want to get to some questions here real quick. We got Raymond Horton with us. Horton with a super chat. Thank you, Raymond. Thank you for all the hard work. Yeah, you guys. Thank you for all the hard work, guys. Go Irish Beat Duke. Thank you, Raymond. I appreciate that very, very much. Yeah, super chat from Matt Bauer 2. I think that's what that is. Hey, Brian, thanks for the breakdowns, man. Is there anywhere I can go to watch all 22 film? I want to be able to see the downfield routes. So not all of them, but I will have some stuff every week where I show all 22 clips of certain plays. I will have some stuff with that kind of looks like the downfield routes where I thought Chris Tyree had some chances to make some big plays this week, but the ball didn't come his way. So the best place to do that, man, is on the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. There's no way I can give access to the film and stuff that we have. So it's just not really something that I know of how you can do it other than just coming to the message board, the premium board at Irish Breakdown, or boards.irishbreakdown.com. But thank you for the super chat very much. And if you're not a member, I think you're going to really like the stuff that we're doing. Tom Connor with super chat. Thank you, Tom. Thanks for keeping my feet on the ground. Still have a stomach ache from the punch in the gut. I'm with you, Tom. I mean, every day I wake up like, God, they had it right there. They had it right there, and they just couldn't get it done. Also, super chat from Mark Krogan. Thank you, Mark. When you watch games at home, do you yell like we do? Well, no, because when I watch games at home, it's usually the next day or that night, and so I don't yell at this TV. I've never been like a yell at the TV. Well, actually, no, that's not true. There's a couple times when I was coaching where I would yell at the screen, but not often. I usually would pound the table when I was mad because then that's not as audible and can't be heard as much. But no, I'll be watching this weekend's game at home, but I'm in work mode, so it's less emotional. It's more work in that instance. Archer 452 is Duke the third or fourth best team on the schedule? Who is one player on each side of the ball that Notre Dame cannot overlook? I mean, right now they're the third best team on the schedule right now because clearly they beat Clemson by 21 points. So right now they're better than they're 4-0. Clemson's 2-2. So right now they're the third best team on the schedule. Louisville's been pretty good so far, but right now there's no question that Duke's the third best team on the schedule. Riley Leonard, the quarterback, is the guy on offense. That's a no-brainer. I mean, he's the guy you've got to really, really worry about on offense. Then defensively, and I talked a lot about like Al Blades and Brandon Johnson and Miles Jones and all those type of guys, but the guy that you've got to worry about to me is Dwayne Carter. He's a really good run defender. If you're not good against him, he could have some impact against you, like Michael Hall type impact. Love Jamion Franklin still playing for them. Absolutely love that kid. Great kid. RJ Owen's a good player. Aeneas Peebles has actually been their most disruptive player. He's another one. He leads them in he's second in tackle. He leads the defensive line in tackles for loss and sacks this season. But Dwayne Carter can be a really stout run defender if you're not on top of your game up the middle. Jamion Franklin, same way. So the interior, you're facing a lot more beef this week than you did last week. And so you're going to be on your guards and center once again are going to have to be on top of their game against their starting interior guys. And then they rotate in Peebles, who's more about quickness and penetrating and those type of things. So it's a really nice combination of guys. Those are the defenders that you can't do. But here's the thing that makes Duke good, Archer, is that there's not just one guy. There's not just one guy. If you stop this guy, they've got nothing else. It's close to that on offense with Riley Leonard. But even then, it's like they still have good players. Defensively, it's like, hey, man, you could not Al Blades and Miles Jones and Dwayne Walker and Jamion Franklin and Aeneas Peebles and Dorian Mousy and Brandon Johnson leads the team in tackles. So, I mean, there's a bunch of guys you can't ignore, and that's what makes their defense so good, in my opinion. Matt 2011 GT praying for health. Brian, go Irish. I appreciate that, man. I appreciate that very much. Florida Irish is kind of off the radar, but what do you think is the outcome of the NC State versus Louisville game? I keep going back and forth on which scenario is best for Notre Dame's schedule perception. Louisville winning is the best for Notre Dame's perception, and then Notre Dame beating Louisville because Louisville will be the game we remember later in the season. I don't know what to make of that game. I mean, I thought I said last week, there's no way that NC State doesn't cover against Virginia. Virginia sucks, and Virginia almost beat them. I'm just done with locks this season because this is just a crazy football season. So I don't know what to make of it. NC State is not I expected them to more quickly adjust to Robert and I's offense than they have. They have not adjusted to it well at all. That's problematic, and they need to get that going here soon because their offense has just not been good this season. Louisville's been a good football team. They've had some sloppy wins, but they're winning. But Notre Dame playing 4 straight games over ranked opponents and then going 3-1 against that, if they're lucky enough to do that, would be very big for the schedule and for the perception. Mr. Sanders says, love the white hat, Driscoll collection. You can find this hat on the in the IB store. And there's a link to it in the description box below. And you can also find it at boards.irishbreakdown.com. At the top, there's a link to the IB store. Karen asks, would our offensive coaching staff benefit from watching film from another school's games, like perhaps Washington? No, not right now. Off-season, Karen, perhaps. There's always time in the offseason to kind of, who are the best offenses in the country? What are they doing? And is there anything that we can adapt that fits what we do? It's not about watching other teams. It's about looking at yourself, looking at the data, looking at the stuff you're doing. What are we not good at? And is it A, do we need to scrap it and focus more on these things? Or B, do we need to tweak some ways that we're getting to this where, look, this play is important for us. We're not very good at it right now. So what can we do to get better at it? Is it a personnel thing? Are we just not asking the right guys to run it? Are we not blocking it effectively because we're not in the right formations? Like, hey, we're trying to run it out of a 3-by-1, but maybe we can run it this way, or we're trying to run it weak side when in fact we need to maybe get an extra hat on that side. Do we need to run it where, we're trying to run it out of the running back is offset straight up and he's getting downhill too quickly? Is it a thing where maybe we take him offset but back? There's other things they do where he's back, where maybe that takes a little longer for him to get downhill, which times the run up. Maybe he's too far back and he's not getting down quick enough. So it's that kind of stuff, Karen, they need to be evaluating and determining, why certain things aren't working. Why aren't we getting more out of this player? Why aren't we getting more out of that guy? When in looking at the things that he's done in practice that he's been very good at, say, hey, we need to be doing more of this because when this guy does this in practice, he's very good. Let's get him some of those opportunities. I think that's something that would really work as well. Ray Holcraft says, with Mike Elko at the helm, what do you expect Duke to try to do defensively to stop Notre Dame's run game? Will they stack the box, run multiple stunts, etc.? They're going to keep doing what they're doing. They're going to be aggressive up front. They're going to run. They're going to be physical in the interior. They'll run some stunts. They'll do some line games to their linebackers. They do a really good job of getting different safeties into the box. So they really do a nice job of inserting that extra box defender in the run game. And they use quickness. I mean, that's the big thing is they're not going to let you get downhill with your run game. That's what they want to do. Use their quickness, trigger their linebackers, be gap assignment correct, and just be aggressive attacking downhill without being a heavy blitzing team. I don't think they're going to be a heavy blitz team. I think they're going to say, we're going to get our numbers in the box. We're going to make you beat us on the football. That's what I think they're going to do this weekend. And then last question here real quick. I'll answer this before we get going. Jacob Hayden says, if you were to project who is Notre Dame starting quarterback coming out of fall camp next season? Jacob, honestly, I have no idea. I don't even know if that guy's on the roster right now. I honestly have no idea. Because I could say it's going to be this guy today, but I say, well, Steve Angeli. Okay. Well, but what if Kenny Minchie beats him out between now and then? What if CJ Carr's phenomenal in spring practice and he needs to be that guy? What if they get a grad transfer or a transfer? I don't have any clue, man. Honestly, they're 5 games into this season. I want to see how the quarterbacks on the roster develop over the next 7 games before I start thinking about whether or not you need a transfer. And then if you do go transfer route, which I think they will need to go transfer route, but is it a transfer like you're looking for the next name Hartman? Or is it more of we're looking for a veteran guy to provide depth, kind of like Ohio State did this year with the kid from Oregon State? They went and got a grad transfer quarterback, but it wasn't to start him or even have him in the competition. It was, you're a veteran guy that's going to give depth and leadership to the guys that are going to play. I think that's going to be determined by how the rest of the year goes. So that's going to do it, folks, for today's show. I really enjoyed today. I hope y'all did too. We'll have 6 o'clock tonight. IB Nation Sports Talk will be there. And then tomorrow we'll be back. Ryan and I will have our keys to victory, our prediction show tomorrow. And then Friday we'll be back for the mailbag. So would love to get more feedback on what you guys think about me switching the Friday and Monday shows, the recruiting with the mailbag. I'd love to get more feedback about this on the message board. So if you're okay with that, one of you guys kind of go put that on the message board. I'd love to get more feedback on that, definitely for sure. So anyway, have a great rest of your day, everybody. hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. It's a great way to support Irish Breakdown. Get a lot more intel type of stuff, a lot more of the breakdown type of stuff, and just great conversation. That's it's open 24/7, man. And Brian Felt and I will definitely look you back up, man, next time I'm in town. So it's great hearing from you. Talk to y'all again very soon on the Irish Breakdown podcast.